All right, guys, how's everybody doing? We are live. Welcome. This is the first ever Calibrated Roundtable with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. So far, we have Dr. Sneckle from Twitter. If you guys know him, I'm going to add him to stage. And we also have Grisha, so he's here as well. These are the first two guests on the Calibrated Roundtable. How are you guys doing today? Let's start with Snack. How are you doing, Snack?
All right, man. First time I've been on one of your streams. Yeah.
No, I appreciate you being here. If you guys don't know, Dr. Sneckle is a prominent voice covering the analytical side of the Ukraine conflict and geopolitics in general. He does a great job, and you guys should all go check out his page. I will post a link to that in the comments section here in a second. And we also have Grisha. How are you doing?
I'm cool. I have never been to things like this, so I might fall out a little bit.
No, it's all good. This is it's a learning experience for all of us. It's the first one. So we just have a number of topics to cover today. If you guys were aware, I'm sure you guys are, but for the people in the chat, our topics of discussion today are the Nuland resignation, which I believe has a great significance on what is happening in Ukraine. The Biden State of the Union address, even though it was the same State of the Union that he gives basically every year, it did have some particulars. Macron's aggressive posturing on Ukraine, the German Air Force leak about a couple weeks ago about sending Taurus missiles, conducting strikes, so on and so forth. Also, a 2024 outlook on the Ukraine conflict in general. And obviously open mic for anybody, any topics that we want to talk about today. So let's go ahead and just start with the, and Armchair's here. Armchair, welcome as well. So this is turning out to be a fantastic roundtable already. Let's start with the Nuland resignation. Snack, I'm curious as to what you think about the recent resignation of Victoria Nuland. Do you think it was forced? Do you think it was by choice? 62 seems a little young for retirement from U.S. politics, so I'm curious as to what you think.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what to think of it. The replacement, Kurt Campbell is the Indo-Pacific guy, so obviously this is in line with the U.S.'s sort of pivot to Asia, I suppose. It might just be that they thought the internal reshuffle to focus on the Pacific was long past due, and they just decided to promote this guy. That's why she's out. At the same time, be aware that Kurt Campbell is by training a Sovietologist. So if you think that it's actually gonna change the State Department's position on Russia, it's not gonna be any difference. They're basically neocon 1 and neocon 2.
Yeah, that was my general thinking on it. I'm this new guy that's coming in, he is more Chinese focused, right?
Yeah, but he's also a Sovietologist by training.
Yeah, so he's very capable. It's not like they're replacing her with somebody who is not going to be doing the exact same thing. Why do you think this change came about?
I don't know necessarily. I haven't heard that much. All I know is that basically this does seem in line with the State Department's goals to move towards the Pacific. But as I said again, this guy's position on Russia is more or less exactly the same as Nuland. So I'm not.
Yeah. Grisha, what do you think?
Actually, I don't keep the closest eye on everything happening because I kind of got to live my life, and even though I'm the most military-looking guy out of all of you, I actually just my whole mind is on work.
Yeah,
definitely. Everything in Russia we usually associate with Nuland is the phone call, and average media doesn't go beyond that.
Yeah. So okay, Armchair.
Well, Ukraine was very much Nuland's project, and she's a incredibly influential person, within the State Department, and as far as running the entire Ukraine project. The whole, you all know the whole meme about the cookies and so on.
Yeah.
So I guess I have to disagree with Snekatron. This isn't significant. I think this is a Now, with that being said, 62 is a, I mean, as far as retiring from politics in America, that would be relatively young. But as far as, I mean, as a civil servant, I don't think it would be too unusual to retire at 62. But in the middle of such an important project and operation, I think that's, I mean, I think it's a, I mean, I think it could quite easily be a sign that the Biden administration is cutting its losses in Ukraine, and that the sort of Ukraine or bust faction is losing the power struggle. I mean, their most prominent their most prominent official just lost power, so that seems to me to be highly significant.
I mean, I don't necessarily view the two sides as like contradictory. I mean, you look at Campbell, like he is, even though his actual role is focused on the Indo-Pacific, like his training is as a classical Sovietologist. So essentially, it's like you look at a shift in focus, but it's like going from like 60-40 to 40-60, right?
Well, and I don't think it's really too unusual. I mean, for an older State Department official to be a Sovietologist, that was what everybody was in the 80s. I don't think that's too unusual. I mean, I think what's perhaps more useful to look at is what have they been doing in the last, what have they been doing since the Cold War?
Do we know what he's been doing?
I mean, he founded the Center for New American Security.
Okay.
Yeah, which is a think tank, like basically a neocon think tank.
Yeah.
The glowiest think tank.
Yeah.
Well, it's not, and I'll disagree with you there. It's not really a neocon think tank. CNAS is a neoliberal thing. It was very revealing back in a decade ago when one of them unintentionally revealed that their role was essentially to push Obama administration policy. They were they're strongly aligned with the Democrats.
I mean, I'm using the actual well, the thing is like neoliberalism. I mean, you want to get a whole discussion like neoliberalism is not is not either Democrat or Republican. It's basically it has more to do with economic liberalization of government functions. But I'm just saying like this is an orientation of this is a think tank that more or less tries to focus on essentially this. It's essentially the same projects like as the Center for the New American, the Project for the New American Century and all that stuff. I mean, it really is about American dominance globally.
Yeah, I just felt like I should point out that CNAS is
it's Democrat. It might be Democrat affiliated, but it's like it's essentially we call Hillary Clinton a neocon, and essentially
I understand.
Neoliberalism, like that's more like you want to like dissolve government functions and turn it over to the private sector. I mean that's when I use that term, I use it in the sort of traditional sense, if you will.
Clown, welcome. Not to derail the conversation. How are you doing today, Clown? If he's here. If he's not here, that's okay. I did want to ask, with this new change of appointment, obviously we have different opinions. Sneck has his opinion. Armchair has his opinion. Do we believe that there is going to be a actual shift in policy away from Ukraine? It's beginning to me, and this goes into some of our other topics today, the Macron recent statements and stuff like that. Do you think we're beginning to see this shift from a U.S. centered support structure for Ukraine to now the Europeans are needing to pick up that slack, and that's what all this posturing is about? Is that what we're thinking? I'm just curious as to your guys' thoughts.
Well, don't everybody talk at once.
He's not
I mean, I think that's quite possible. It's this making hard predictions about exactly which way the political wind is blowing is always a bit like reading the entrails. But I mean, I think that would be a particularly given some of the very hawkish rhetoric coming out of Europe. I mean, you pointed out Macron. Now, I guess it should be noted that Macron is very much alone in this. But we've seen this before, where sort of somebody makes some crazy statement about we need to do this escalation in aid, and then it becomes mainstream, and then it happens over the course of several months. And yeah, I mean, I think it would not be. I would not be too surprised if, I mean, particularly given, I mean, we've seen American support wane. There's, money for Ukraine is very much tied up in Congress right now. It's a huge question mark as to whether anything will be approved. I personally don't think it will be. I've had people tell me that something's going to get passed, but I remain skeptical. Particularly after the Democrats offered a bunch of sweeteners to the Republicans and it still didn't get passed. So yeah, I mean, I would not be surprised if the sort of center of gravity of NATO for this war shifts to Europe from the United States. Now European NATO is far less capable than the United States, so I think that's kind of shows which way the wind is blowing as far as the war goes.
Now on top of this, and this can maybe go to Grisha because you focus more on the military side of things, outside of the geopolitical.
Am I the 17-year-old military expert on the round table?
I'm just curious as to your thought.
I have 7K hours on Hoi4, so obviously
Okay.
5-star general. But yeah, you can ask.
So if Europe takes over this mantle of providing aid to Ukraine, becomes the driving force behind it, is Europe in a position militarily to continue support? The way I look at France and Britain and Germany is that they kind of they're obviously under the nuclear protection of the United States. Their militaries are small and hyper-focused. And, they don't have necessarily the industry to continue supporting this war in Ukraine ad nauseum. So do you think that Europe has a chance of continuing support for Ukraine to hold the lines, I guess, where they are in Ukraine?
No. I mean, their own militaries are lacking in every single direction. Unless they're going to start producing now and pour everything into it, they're not going to achieve any results. Because, I mean, when you're... It's like there was a scandal, for example, in UK when they sent all of their naval missiles against ships. Not sure what was the exact term, but basically UK itself had no left. And this just shows how little of each type of armament they have, which, I mean... You have nuclear protection and all of that, but Ukraine war is not the war that's fought by nukes. You need conventional arms, and I mean they're lacking in that department everywhere. So I doubt it will take some serious political will and convincing of the population, which is the most difficult part, because as we see, there are protests everywhere, seemingly in Europe, especially the farmers. And I mean, Poland, just take example of Poland. Even though it's a nation that's kind of supposed to be the main bulwark of the Ukrainian support, they are the ones having those protests. They're the ones blocking routes of, for example, even like simple aid from the volunteers was stuck on those trucks that got blocked on the border, and yet. So I doubt they can.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, and it seems more like political frustration, especially from Macron right now, where he's having issues in Africa. He's obviously having domestic issues with the farmer protests. I mean, all of his government buildings are covered in shit right now. So he's got a lot of problems, and it seems like this is just his way of appearing strong and really pushing for this, especially when not 2 days later, we have backtracking from him. We have backtracking from his Minister of Defense about the possibility of sending French troops into Ukraine, which seems like a no-go. Grisha, in your personal opinion, do you think we are going to see European boots on the ground in Europe before some sort of ceasefire or, something happens in Ukraine?
I mean, there are already European boots on the ground.
Officially.
I mean, I doubt Russia will launch nukes if there is going to be if there's going to be like an official NATO, just an intervention. Simply because, as much as people want, I don't see that will from the people in the government. And seemingly all those 2 years of special military operation had been the proof that it's where we seem to be talking a lot on that matter and promising but under delivering. But I'm Russian. I probably can talk about it the loudest in this room. Though it's going to completely change the nature of the conflict because Russians and Ukrainians, of course, a big portion of people see it as some sort of a civil war. And in a way it is. We've been for majority of our history under a single country. But if there is going to be, imagine, German soldiers in Ukraine. That's like, that's not just a Leopard. That's a German tank crew in that Leopard. And the whole, it wouldn't even be propaganda. It would be just like people literally just waking up, remembering their history that like, bro, there is another invasion of Russia happening. And when you look, and we study the Great Patriotic War history very well, and we know that half of the European Russia was burned down and tens of millions were killed, not just military, but civilians too, in the most brutal ways possible. It's going to be a wake-up call for so many people because in Russia, especially those not at the front, those that are untouched by like drones flying in and stuff. For example, recently there was one in St. Petersburg, and it is a wake-up call that like, stuff has been happening. That's going to be the wake-up call. That's going to be when the rural people, so to say, the deep people of Russia will wake up. And usually when this kind of folk wake up, this is when we sweep all the wars to an end. For us, it's always we're struggling to turn on that engine of the war machine. Napoleon, Great Patriotic War, but in the end we get the job done, and that's what matters. That's why we're alive, and I am here sitting. But yeah, I think it can happen, and it might not result in a nuclear exchange, but it's gonna be a big L for the whole European NATO and biggest wake-up call for the whole Russia.
Yeah. And we are already seeing that, I believe, slowly starting to play out the way you said. I do think that there is that waking up that you're talking about. Clown, I'm curious as to your thoughts on the recent Macron statements and the question I just posed to Grisha about European troops entering Ukraine.
Sure. First, hi, guys. You have to kind of dissect Macron's language a bit. He's using conditional language. That's important because this isn't the decisive statement everyone's making it up to be. He's not saying he's going to deploy troops on the ground. He's saying if the front line gets pushed too much towards Kiev or Odessa, then it might maybe trigger French military involvement. That's not how you do brinksmanship. That's not how you speak if you're issuing a threat. It's how you speak if you're perhaps trying to look big and take it and seize the opportunity of weak European leadership when there's a EU election coming up and you're not very popular. The thing is, it's also the framing of it is notice he's kind of walking back from earlier statements of 1991 borders or else. Now he's saying, okay, everything east of the Dnieper, that's fine. Just leave Odessa alone, leave Kiev alone. I don't think he's talking like a man who has put his foot down and drawn a line in the sand and said, "You do not cross this line." Give it a few months, and he might say, "Oh, you know what? Odessa, that's fine too. Go for it." We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I actually posted about this earlier, and to me, like the defense minister actually came out and had a clarification of what he said, and to me, it basically reminded me kind of like a logic of a blocking detachment. I mean, this is what he clarifies. Okay, so you have providing weapons, and then you have co-belligerents, which means Russians fighting French. Those are two poles, okay? But there's stuff in between we could do, okay? That's basically that's the way they explain it. So between the transfer of arms and between co-belligerents, have we done everything in that space? Are there more paths we can explore? Well, let's work back through this a little bit logically. Like, so what can they do? They can do intelligence stuff. They can do training. But the thing is, you don't actually need to have an official deployment of significant numbers of troops to do any of that. The only instance in which you can do a kind of middle ground kind of intervention, but not have direct confrontation, would be something like rear area security, which is essentially would be like what people have been saying for a while, that NATO kind of guards the border and guards rear areas, so more Ukrainians can go to the front. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. And also, this is quite also in line with perhaps concerns that Europe has if there is a kind of dissolution or sort of systemic crisis in the Ukrainian state, that you have huge numbers of refugees coming, and you need some kind of way to sort of filter the border, right?
I think for Macron, the hope here is the best case scenario is, Russia does what it's going to do. It comes to Kiev or Odessa. He plays the okay, we're coming in now card, and Russia doesn't, and Russia stops, and they don't have to go in, and they get to say, oh, look, we deterred them from going further. That's their face-saving off-ramp, and, we have a negotiation, we have peace. But ultimately, I mean, a lot of the U.S. vets I've been talking to who started this out as vehemently on the Ukrainian side are now are now describing this conflict as Russia will take what it wants to take, and it'll end when it wants to end it. So I think it's just a means of trying to limit how far Russia pushes.
Yeah, I mean, once you take co-belligerents off the table, though, I mean, basically all your troops can do is kind of sit in the back somewhere, and what else can you do there?
Well, I think this. I apologize.
Oh no, go for it. I was just gonna say they can't even supply much do the supply card, because at this point they're negotiating with their Middle Eastern partners to repossess all the arms they sold them, cancel all their contracts, and redirect all that to Ukraine. There's clearly not enough equipment to go around. Who are you fooling? Kind of thing.
Which is another interesting thing, because I cannot believe that they're trying to buy that stuff back. Sorry, Armchair, go ahead.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say, I mean, I've written about this a few times before, but I think this is actually kind of a page out of the Syrian playbook, where in 2017, 2016, 2017, after basically the Syrian rebels were defeated, the Syrian forces against Assad's regime were just defeated by the Syrian government with the assistance of Iran and Russia. You had various foreign powers insert their own troops to essentially act as human shields, to put it a little bit bluntly, to shield those defeated partner forces, to sort of with the effect of freezing the conflict and waiting for more favorable political circumstances to develop. Now, so I wouldn't be surprised if as Macron sort of posited, if the lines come unstuck in eastern Ukraine, the Russians are steaming towards the Dnieper, if NATO put together some kind of an expeditionary force with the intention of doing exactly that with a sort of rump Ukraine west of the Dnieper. this and I mean it's been done before, and I think it's now will the Russians accept that as they accepted it in Syria? I tend to doubt it, but it would blowing up NATO troops who are explicitly in Ukraine would certainly be a hell of an escalation, would invite open conflict.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to pay attention to for that is like the actual argument used by Turkey when they did their incursion is essentially the security zone for migrants. Basically, we want to block migration or slow it down. So that's why they had the security belt, and they actually end up deporting a bunch of migrants into that security zone as well. So the utility of having a strip at least of like 20, 30 kilometers where you can sort of block and filter any huge migration, because look, if like 5-10 million Ukrainians are ultimately like heading to Europe, there's going to be a flood of people, and there's a practical reason why you would want to beef up security and perhaps even like mission creep that security mission into Ukraine itself.
Yeah, I'm not well. I mean, but by this point, I mean Ukraine has what 20 million, maybe a little over 20 million people still left in the country. There's
a little under 30 million. Still a little under 30 million, between 25 and 30. So you can stand to lose another 10, 15. Yeah.
Is that according to Ukrainian numbers though? That was the Ukrainian MOD that released that, right? Or the Ukrainian government, the 30 million figure?
Yeah, but I think it's lower than that. But anywhere between 25 and 30. There's not anything low like 18 million or anything like that. Which means they could still flood out a lot more people.
I mean, I would not be surprised in the slightest if it was on the low end of 20 million. But certainly I did get a kick recently out of a statement that said like if the Russians invade you, if the Russians take over the rest of Ukraine, there will be 20 million Ukrainians, 20 million more Ukrainians fleeing to Europe. It's like there wouldn't be anyone left.
Putin weaponized immigrants again.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, you saw like recently they had that one van that had like 34 people in it. Each one of them paid 10,000 euros to get out. Like people are desperate. People will fucking they'll hightail it out of there.
Well, and I mean and also I guess I have been heartened, and I did my own small part to raise awareness of this issue, but I have been heartened that the European nations don't seem to have decided to throw international law in the dumpster and start refouling refugees to be drafted.
Yeah, I mean it's going to be a shit show. I mean, look, if there is like any kind of degradation in the ability of like Ukraine to actually police its borders, and like there's going to be a tidal wave. I mean, people are already desperate to get out, but they're held back by the border guard. They're held back by the amount of like the bribes they have to pay to get out. Once you remove those, I mean, anybody with a summons hanging over their heads is just going to run.
Well, actually, I think this is an interesting point, which is there's been a lot of talk about this new mobilization law, which would at least on paper allow for total mobilization. People have been making a lot of noise about this, but I don't see how this would be different from what's already been happening. I think this would just be formalizing mobilization practices that have been going on in Ukraine since the start of the war. It's not like they've been being very selective about who they're drafting.
Well, they actually are being a little bit selective, and the way that this kind of works is I explained this before. I mean, for every summons they send out, every 6 summons they send out to get 1 conscript, the conversion rate is actually fairly low. What means a lot of people are just kind of hiding and just like hoping that they would not get picked up. And this is also why you don't see protests, because if you protest, you get picked up by the cops, 100% you get mobilized. It's a combination of like this military measure and also social control measure, and it's a kind of balancing act. Like how hard do you want to squeeze to get conscripts out of this pool?
But I mean, how much harder can they squeeze?
They can squeeze a lot. They can squeeze a lot harder. They can squeeze a lot harder.
They can still mobilize the 18 to 25s, which they're refusing to do.
Yeah.
Well, are they actually refusing to do that though? I'm very skeptical they're not mobilizing 18 to 25. So far the mobilization basement is 25. They reduced it to 25.
they passed a demobilization bill, if I'm not mistaken, for the 18 to 25s who were doing their training while the war happened. It's territorial defense, so they get to go home. It's because if they do this, it's mortgaging their future, and if current trends hold, especially at the casualty rate level, they don't have a future worth to fight for anymore if shit goes south.
Well, we've also seen we've seen many child soldiers within the Ukrainian armed forces.
Well, I'm
very skeptical that the Ukrainians would willingly release. Would first of all not draft young men, and second of all, I'm very skeptical they would willingly release people from the service. I think what you're talking about is basically propaganda.
You could still enlist. Whether voluntarily or air quotes voluntarily, but there is no mobilization order for under 25s.
Yeah, a lot of the youngest soldiers that come up to the ideological battalions, and that's how they're recruited.
Well, I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that we're putting far too much emphasis on what Ukrainian law says, and far too little emphasis on what the practice is, which is people being press ganged off the street, and people with deep disabilities being mobilized. Right? I don't think they care.
Well, it's selectively. As I said, that I have fairly good high confidence that 5-to-1, 6-to-1 ratio is about correct. This is the kind of ratio that the conscription office actually uses.
Is it selective to mobilize people with Down syndrome?
Well, basically, yeah, because what's selective in the sense we want to mobilize as many people as we can without actually causing social unrest. So the way I've described this before is okay, so there's one guy that gets snatched off the street, dumped in a trench. There are 5 other guys that are fearing for their life and just in hiding. They're not going to protest. They're not going to do anything. They're going to keep their head down. They're going to bribe some officials. They find ways to avoid being thrown in a trench. And what this ends up doing is this actually explains why Ukraine is seemingly so stable, why protests are so small. It's because all the men, there are millions of summons handed out at this point, but they only converted 15 to 20% of them into actual conscripts. So this is the way that this works is a game. We know that the system's horribly inefficient, but the fear of you being snatched off the street or being picked up by cops and sent to die in a trench, that keeps people in line, right? Without actually forcing the state to actually go and crack skulls all the time, right? So it's kind of inefficient by design, but of course, if they push too hard, they squeeze harder, and let's say they want to convert 1 out of 3 of these summons into a conscript. Well, that's when you start running into people thinking hell, I'm going to get conscripted anyway, might as well protest, might as well fight the cops. This is actually what we see more and more.
I guess my question is what can they do to convert? What can they do to actually scoop up more people? Because from what I'm seeing, they're doing everything possible.
One of the things that they actually are doing and they are logistically preparing is they are basically streamlining and modernizing the financial infrastructure to instantly basically freeze all your bank accounts. And this is because of this planning. There was actually a mini bank run in Ukraine in January that kind of scared the bejesus out of a lot of the businessmen. And right now there's some pushback. But they're still finalizing the language and the actual procedures of how to do it. But it's they're going to do stuff they're going to blacklist your bank accounts. They're going to do possibly blacklist your family's bank accounts. There are all these measures that they're going to have to calibrate to say okay, we can push this far, but as long as we push this to the threshold of not causing too much social unrest, right? That's the main issue here, because this war is very strange, right? Because you see so many people who are conscripted and they just die within weeks or die within a month, and people view going to the front as a death sentence. But at the same time, a lot of the country is very normal. A lot of them, especially in Kiev, life there is actually quite normal, because the government creates this kind of sense of normalcy in that conscription is actually hitting people very unevenly. I mean, there are also some areas where like half the men in a town have been conscripted, but there's a smaller towns and they don't really influence the perception of how much of this is going on, right?
Well, I mean, I guess I could also point out that so much of what we see coming out of Ukraine is subject to censorship on pain of death. I mean, if you put the wrong information out, if you put out something that will embarrass the Ukrainian regime, you're likely to get shot in the back of the head.
You're likely. No. What is like? It is possible to get shot in the head, but it's not likely. But you're still scared of it because it could happen. So, Ukraine's state capacity is actually terrible. They actually do not have the ability to enforce all these things, but they keep the fear of it out there. But if you look at like some of these telegrams, like they're run out of like Ukraine, like that Masno telegram, which is actually a lot of people on the Z side follow. Like there's a guy in Ukraine, and he's just like openly tweeting, he's even talking to people in the Ukrainian military. It's just like the way I've described it is the way I've heard it being described is like it's anarcho tyranny. Like it's tyranny, but then at the same time, the state is just such a banana. Like it has such shitty capacity that you can still navigate it, all the corruption around, and pay off the right people and still and not be bothered by it too much.
Well, that was very interesting, and I'm not trying to interrupt you guys if you guys want to keep talking about that. Let me try to think about a question here. Do we think that Ukraine is going to push that that border, I guess, that red line for themselves, where they will end up sacrificing the future of their country in defense of their country? Do we think that is on the docket, that that sort of protected group of young men? Do you think that they will be drafted and sent away?
I mean, it's already happening. There is already no future. Like, I don't see it. It's scope if you think Ukraine is gonna be. If anything happens, there is no future. I mean, in the whole world, the demographic situation is horrible. But I mean, when you lose that much of your population, and okay, even if there is a miracle pulled out, whatever, counteroffensive number 2 succeeds and stuff, who is gonna live in that country? Is it gonna be 1 billion investments from USA, or how do they imagine it? No, it's already dead. Well, my opinion, yeah,
and I share the same opinion, where I do think that the Ukrainian state as a whole is basically on the clock, and maybe not, the Ukrainian state. Like there will probably still be a Ukraine after this is all over, but it will not resemble anything that you see now. That is my personal opinion, and I think that the demographic aspect has a huge role to play in that. Does anybody have a differing opinion?
Well, if I could show a graphic here, and I think this will sort of be illustrative. If you look at, Germany took decades to recover from the Second World War. The Ukraine has suffered so many casualties and such a level of demographic loss, both through battle casualties and also through refugees, honestly. But I suspect there have been far more people who, actually, it's not even a suspicion thing. There have been far more people who've fled the country than who've been killed. Ukraine is never going to come back the way it was, and the way it wasn't particularly special either. Now, let me see if I can share my screen here and show a graphic, which also I think would speak to the sort of 25 to 18 demographics as far as men. Can I? Here we go.
Let me know if you can do it, and let me know if I need to do something.
I think I can do this. I've used Streamer before. Here we go. Let me just share that.
Okay, and then I can add it to stage. There we go.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is Ukraine's population pyramid at the beginning of 2023. Now, this is based on somewhat dubious data, but it's consistent with what I've seen from other. It's consistent with, I guess, what I've seen from other sources, and it's what we have. And you can see, first of all, that the 25 to 18 bracket. I mean, that's this divot in the chart. That's from refugees, and the kind of remarkable thing is that the male and female refugee outflow seems to be pretty similar, which is somewhat at odds with the reporting that it's women who've left. But I mean, on the other hand, there's reasons to downplay the flight of male refugees. But also, also you can just see. Just imagine this demographic situation going forward in the future. It's going to be catastrophic.
Yeah,
that divot is just going to get wider and wider and wider.
Yeah, and to sort of go back and belabor an earlier point. I mean, the protected bracket there, that 25 to 18 range, that is not a very full that is not a very full bucket. I mean, even if those people are being de jure protected, even if those people are being de facto protected, rather than just de jure protected, and they're being people are grabbing them off the street anyways.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to pay attention to even before that is just like you're seeing a lot more resistance to these more aggressive methods, which goes to show that with the passage of the conscription law, they're basically it's giving them a green light to be a little more proactive. But of course, like as I said, like it's a balancing act. If they squeeze hard, people are going to push back, right? And this is where you see like now the spate of videos where like recruiters are being beaten up and stabbed and being attacked with axes and stuff. Like,
oh yeah,
like
you saw that video, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that we've seen sporadic resistance before, but this is like you see like 3 or 4 of these in 1 week. It's quite new. But the harder you squeeze, the harder people push back, and all of a sudden, this docile population that was just kind of like putting their head down and hoping they wouldn't get picked up by the cops, like this docile population starts to fight back, right? Which is why the government itself is also getting cold feet on perhaps implementing some of the more extreme measures as stipulated by the conscription law.
The saving grace here might be that the 18 to 25 cohort is too small to make the difference they wanted to, and that might spare them in the end, which is really tragic when you think about it.
Well, the future of Ukraine will live on in Canada, right?
Yeah.
As it has been for generations now.
It's like a population in exile sort of deal.
Yeah.
I have a slight change of topic now away from the demographics and everything. Do we, as a group, think that, or as individuals, I guess, I don't know why I said as a group, do we think that Zelensky is going to stay in office? I've heard rumors that they're already looking for a replacement for him. Obviously, nobody knows for sure. We can't know behind the scenes. Do you think that Zelensky stays in Ukraine and continues this fight for as long as he can? Do you think that he's replaced and or usurped in some way? I'm curious. And then after that, do you think that he becomes a president in exile or is just a non-factor in Ukrainian politics in general?
Well, his wife has stated plainly that he does not intend to run for a second term. So there's that. On the other hand,
elections.
That's fair. Like assuming there's elections. But Zelensky being effectively paid off and exiled to England as an ambassador suggests what many have suspected, that he did pose a political threat. The question is, who else does, if anyone, and can we expect a coup?
I mean, the thing about this is, like, as I explained to many people, like from months and months ago, like, don't get hopes up on Zelensky. He has no institutional support. Zelensky, people forget. Okay, this is what I want to emphasize. Like, people forget he had a political career. Okay, they had the election. Oh, like he ran on a peace platform. That's very nice, but due to various circumstances, he became a national security president. That was his thing. Like, he built up this apparatus where he basically ruled through the National Security and Defense Council. Because he couldn't get stuff to the Rada, so he basically started framing his initiatives, like anti-corruption initiatives.
You know when he became a national security president, right? This was before even getting elected. First round of debates, Poroshenko pushed him on it, called him weak, and he shifted because that's how you get. That's
actually not. That's actually not it. I mean, the reason is actually far more interesting. Is basically because, like, in 2020, he kind of lost control of serving the people. Like, the party would not vote like party line with him. And this becomes a governance issue where the transmission of policy cannot go through the Rada. So then he decided to do an end run around it, and this went to the National Security Council, framed his initiatives as like, this is a national security issue, so the Rada can get the fuck out. And he was only moderately successful at it because prior to the SMO, he actually faced judiciary pushback. Because people would then appeal these lists of traitors. They would actually then, and many of them, these things were overturned. But like with the SMO and martial law, like this it becomes a very powerful way of ruling. But of course, the thing is, you realize, like, when you do that, when your argument against all your rivals, like they're weak or they're traitors, well, I mean, you can't be the one stepping down, right? This is a logic that just traps him. Like, he cannot back down. I mean, right before the SMO, right before February 2022, he was going up against Poroshenko, and his whole thing is Poroshenko funded terrorism because he bought coal from the Donbass, right? So he funded the LNR, therefore he's a terrorist. Like, when you start using this kind of logic against all your rivals, well, I mean, what do you think is going to happen when you're the one who taps out?
All I meant by what I added was that it's a myth that he ran and got elected on a peace platform. He didn't. Right.
I mean, I would believe in a palace coup when I saw it happen. I think that's cope, for lack of a better term. I mean, I think Zelensky's position in power is very secure right now. I mean, he's going to. I mean, he was supposed to leave. There was supposed to be elections this month, but those aren't going to happen, and he's just going to rule as a dictator. That's I don't really see any serious force that is going to challenge him, at least absent some other major developments.
Yeah, like, there was actually recent polling as well, like looking at other people, other politicians, and like basically like everybody, including Zelensky, got less popular over the course of 2023. But like Zelensky went from like 90% to like 75%, but somebody like Klitschko went from like 80% down to 50%. So like all his rivals actually like end up looking worse than he did. So
if we could trust Ukrainian polling in the slightest.
Oh God, can you imagine Klitschko?
I mean, Klitschko's even regarded by like Ukrainians as a fucking idiot. Like, he's
give the guy a break. He made a career out of being punched in the head. There's brain trauma there.
Yeah, okay, but there's like rivers of shit flowing in Kiev right now. So
it's
the sewage pipe bursting and all.
That's a perfect president of Ukraine right there.
General consensus: if Zelensky's going to stay in office, I think that's what everybody kind of agrees on. There's not really a power center that can challenge him right now, and I personally think he's made it that way himself. He's done a good job of consolidating and keeping good control over his position. Do we think that he goes into exile after the war? Because
it depends on like how big of a rump Ukraine is.
Yeah. So if there's would you say if there's a massive breakthrough, do you think he runs?
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to think that Zelensky would flee the country. As far as whether
he would go to Lvov, where there might be a protectorate set up by NATO security forces.
Okay, but would you consider that still fleeing?
So you're saying he'd need a ride, not ammunition, right?
Yeah, there it is.
Well, yeah, it's because there's no more ammunition to send.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to sort of bear in mind too is like when you talk about you end up when we talk about like insane nationalism, like you end up in a sort of headspace that's different from what is entirely rational. right? So Zelensky himself, he made himself functionally into a nationalist because he allied himself with these security hardliners and the nationalists like Budanov, right? This is the thing to bear in mind. Like, I think Willie OAM, you know him. He interviewed his Aussie friend, but he talked about GUR, how he said they're the trailer trash and they just do insane violent shit all the time, like shoot civilians and all that. Like they're approaching that from like a rational perspective, but the point of like nationalism isn't necessarily to win, is to create some sort of propaganda of the deed, right? Is to create terror, create like a hugely resonance kind of example for future nationalists to follow. So like for the nationalists themselves, like aligning with Zelensky makes a certain amount of sense, because if they go down fighting but they manage to do this heroic sacrifice and they keep the idea of Ukraine alive, that's enough of a win in their book, right? So, like this is very funny how all of a sudden, like, you just have Zelensky who he did not run as an insane nationalist, but then over time he became more and more like aligned, and right now he's aligned with perhaps the most extreme of the nationalists, which is Budanov, right? And this conflict that people are painting between Zelensky and the nationalists, like, it just doesn't exist, because this is like the difference between ISIS and Nusra, right? So if Azov is Nusra, then Zelensky aligned himself with ISIS.
I'd say at the rate Ukrainians are dying under him, he's more like a Russian nationalist, much more hardcore than many that we got.
Well, I mean, you look at what happened to ISIS. Like, they just went out like attacking everybody, right? They took on everybody. They fought everybody, and in the end, they got smashed because of it, right? Yeah. Invited everybody to bomb them.
I mean, ISIS, they provoked too much the countries that could do something.
Yeah. So Zelensky probably going to stay to the end, might exile to Lvov, might exile out. Obviously, we can't tell the future. I have a question that pertains to the current situation militarily for the AFU in Ukraine. Over the past couple of days, weeks, I guess you could say, we have seen an extraordinary amount of attrition done to Ukraine's self-propelled artillery pieces, to air defense pieces. We've seen sort of a shift since February the 8th, I believe, when Syrskis was put into place as head of the AFU commander. Do we think that Do we think that this is potentially just the Russian Ministry of Defense releasing more footage, or do you think that there has been a actual kinetic change on the battlefield that is allowing the Russians to target things like Patriot air defense systems? Obviously, we saw Abrams and Berdichi and stuff like that. Grisha, if you want to take that one, and then whoever.
I had recently met up with one of the Russian officers who fights in Ugledar. The general thing is they are trying to solve their manpower issue with more drones, but obviously that solution is only temporary. And he even jokes himself that they went too hard on the personnel, that they now have to go deeper into like electronic warfare against the drones and stuff like this. But this stuff is going to be figured out, and then Ukraine is going to really have nothing left. Because right now, for example, in Ugledar, where he fights, the best is, for example, measuring Mavics, because Mavic 3 is a pretty universal weapon. It's both a recon drone and it can drop grenades. It's good at both. And for one Russian Mavic, there is like 20 Ukrainian. Like, we have an edge in the military drones. I mean, all the Ukrainian Bayraktars and stuff are a long time gone. We have Geran and stuff, but civilian ones, those we are absolutely smashed in regards to numbers. But we are figuring it out right now, and I'm sure that's a temporary thing. The question is, what is for Ukraine after that, especially since now we're seeing more and more Western platforms being destroyed, which is like the last Wunderwaffe, and what even is left in the Western arsenal, like the F-16s, I guess. But, I mean, there's nothing next in line to hold the new Wunderwaffe, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, the thing.
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
No, the thing that what we're seeing, like long range air defense being destroyed. What you're not seeing, like, so where are all the Buk, right? Where are the NASAMs, right? Those should have been like the next in line if they were going to do penetration. Basically, what I think is like a lot of the systems either run out of ammo or have been destroyed, and their medium range air defense is basically like kaput at this point. This is why Russian drones are ranging 30, 50 kilometers behind front lines, right?
Well, we did see some NASAMs recently.
Oh, okay, yeah. I guess you did. The Buk should be quite common, but we haven't seen.
Yeah, there should be much more medium range air defenses. And a month ago or so, I believe, we saw an extermination of Strela and other short range air defense systems, which I think was sort of trying to prevent the long range air defense systems that we're seeing now from being forced to push to the front. So I think it's kind of a progression. They're trying to get rid of their least valuable assets while getting the job done. And now we're getting up to the more valuable assets, and we're seeing those being destroyed on the battlefield.
Yep.
Well, I mean, we've also seen Russian Air Force activity increase significantly over the last, since the start of the year, I guess. With the Russians running, I mean, hundreds of sorties daily. I'm not sure. I mean, I needed to think about it a little bit to put an exact number on it, but certainly we've seen reports of hundreds of glide bombs hitting the Ukrainians daily. Every Su-34 carries somewhere between 2 and 4 of those. So divide the number of reported glide bomb strikes by however many an Su-34 is going to be carrying. You can figure out how many strike sorties with that type of aircraft, at least. This is creating really large and serious problems for the Ukrainians, and they're and the one thing they've been able to do to have success against Russian aviation is sort of attacking with standoff weapons like this, is to drag strategic SAMs up close to the front line and try to basically hit them try to basically conduct anti-air ambushes with strategic SAMs firing from fairly close to the front. And this has this obviously opens these very large, valuable systems up to attack from up to observation and attack, which we've seen happening repeatedly over the last couple of weeks.
What?
Also, I think this. I apologize for.
No, go ahead.
I apologize. Also, I think that it's quite possible there. Some of these systems are going forward in an attempt to cover this. Some of these strategic level systems are going forward to cover the commitment of their, at least what I've pegged as their strategic reserve west of Avdiivka, because we've seen, Western equipment which was previously protected committed to combat in the Avdiivka area.
Just for all of our listeners, most of the losses here, I'll take us over to our map real fast just so you guys can see. I have the Patriot marked. So here's Avdiivka, obviously, and what Armchair is talking about is most of the systems have been taken out. The strategic air defense systems have been taken out around Pokrovsk back here. So here's where the Patriot was taken out. We have the geolocation for it. But this is the area where most of the significant losses have been recorded. This is where the HIMARS was. This is where other air defense systems were. So that is what the reference is to. Go ahead, Armchair.
Yep. Yeah, so I mean, you can see that system is trying to cover Avdiivka.
Yeah.
And this is so, and these high-value air defense systems are likely being pushed in to accompany high-value ground units that have been committed to the Avdiivka AO. I mean, we saw how the 47th Brigade suddenly got a new Abrams tank battalion, which it did not have previously. And we've seen strikers showing up. We've seen all this Western equipment, which was previously protected, showing up in west of Avdiivka, trying to hold back the Russians. So it shows the level of importance the Ukrainians have placed on this. And I mean, this is their strategic reserve. This is their stuff, which has been heavily protected up until now. And it shows the importance they place on this.
Is there another next thing that the Ukrainians have? Because what it's looking to me like right now is that the Ukrainians are now putting literally the stuff that is very bad for foreign defense industries, like the Abrams and stuff like that. They're throwing this stuff throwing it into combat to hold Berdichi, right? And that's very weird to me. You didn't do it earlier when you could have used it to perhaps help Avdiivka. You're now throwing it in because what I assume is that there's not a very strong line of defense behind Berdichi and Simkivka, where the Ukrainians are trying to hold right now, and they're trying to create these lines of defense further back. But is there anything to hold these lines of defense further back, or are they just hoping that mines and human bodies are going to do the trick?
Well, I think this merits a two-part response. Just first of all, I think the fall of Avdiivka, the way it fell, how it fell so quickly, was a surprise to the Ukrainians. They did not expect that after the lines had been sort of static for a couple of months at that point, the Russians would have a fairly bold plan of attack, and they would actually fight through the urban area and sort of cut Avdiivka into multiple pockets and just dismantle it that way in a fairly short period of time. And the Ukrainians did try to send in one of their more strategic units, which was Azov. They sent Azov in to try to rescue the situation in Avdiivka, and they got routed. Azov ran for it. So we then, I think this commitment of the stuff behind Azov, the units with the fancy Western equipment, this is a sign of panic. As far as what's behind this, I mean, there's certainly more equipment that's trickling in. I saw a report there was another battalion of T-72s the Ukrainians had managed to source. I don't think there's, beyond there's that Challenger company running around somewhere, but I don't think there's a lot of, at least a lot.
I saw one sunk in mud today.
Yeah. I don't think there's a lot of Western equipment sitting around behind this. I think we're getting to the bottom of the Ukrainian equipment barrel, like genuinely at the bottom. They've committed their last high quality reserve. I'm not sure what's left. And also, I'd note it's getting into spring. The ground's going to be hardening. Conditions are getting better for an offensive.
And this winter wasn't particularly wet. It wasn't. There's not a lot of snow on the ground. There's not a lot of groundwater. It was a dry winter.
Yeah, I mean, going into April, conditions are going to be very good, yeah. And I think we've seen. I posited earlier that the sort of Battle of Avdiivka was the Russians marking out, sort of filling the calendar between now and summer 2024, and also acting to grind down Ukrainian reserve forces even further. Well, we've just seen what's probably their strategic reserve committed west of Avdiivka. It's getting into summer. I'm wondering where the hell the rest of the Ukrainian army is, and there's, at least according to my understanding of things, there's an awful lot of large Russian units running around that we don't know what they're doing.
Guys, I'd like to ask you, what does Ukraine need to win? Because from what I understand, you guys are all, if not pro-Russian, you guys are neutral and you are like an observer to the conflict, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What does Ukraine need to do to win? Like, genuine.
Manpower.
What's your definition of winning?
Yeah, that's a good question. What do you mean win? Like 1991 borders? What they want is a win?
I don't think that's possible as an objective.
Something more realistic.
Like a frozen conflict, right?
Get a ceasefire with Russia.
Yeah.
Well, to get a ceasefire with Russia, all they need to do is, repeal their law that forbids them to negotiate. That's not a difficult thing to do. If we mean a military victory, they're going to need a lot more manpower than they have. Unfortunately, it doesn't look good.
I would say
it's not just manpower.
Thank you for telling me that it doesn't look good, but what is the real thing that they can get that they're maybe waiting on that's maybe under a lock in the?
That's what I'm trying. That's what I'm trying to say, man. There's nothing that they could get that's going to shift the strategic balance in a way that's going to allow them to get their maximal objectives. F-16s, sure, that's nice, but like, how many? Even if they get the 200 plus they're asking for, do you know how many pilots the Americans are training this year?
Yeah, I think that the
7.
I think that
Seven fucking pilots isn't having a fighting chance in the air. Any aid they receive because of the Shaheds and the Gerans is going to be mainly spent on replenishing air defense, and they don't make that many PAC-3s or NASA missiles a year. That's scraping barrel bottom. They could send 1 billion tanks. It doesn't matter. There aren't enough people to drive them.
Well, you're missing one key piece. 7 pilots is 7 potential ghosts of Kiev. So widely known.
You're right. They should mobilize the 60 pluses, get the babushka air defense batteries running, and they'll be invincible.
I think what the Ukrainians need to win right now, in their own terms, and not obviously 1991 borders, but realistically, I think what the Ukrainians need to do is they need to do every single thing in their power to get as much Western influence into Ukraine at this moment as they possibly can. We talked about it earlier. I don't think the Russians are really very keen on starting World War III. I don't think that necessarily NATO troops going into Ukraine is going, or not NATO sanctioned troops, but some sort of European coalition going into Ukraine is not going to stop the Russians. But I do think it would create hesitation, and I think that is would potentially create an opportunity for some sort of ceasefire. The only thing outside of that is a serious Western economic commitment that I don't think that they're willing to make, obviously, because they haven't so far, which would be going on some sort of a war footing, increasing production greatly to the point where the cost for a Russian victory, whatever you consider that in Ukraine, becomes so great that a settlement where, Ukraine doesn't join NATO, that sort of stuff becomes much more tangible for Ukraine, and the Russians would potentially come to the negotiating table for that. But again, that requires negotiations, which the Ukrainians have basically, at least this current regime has basically said, there's no way of getting around that. The biggest thing would be regime change in Ukraine, I think. If you got a regime in there that was willing to communicate with the Russians, that would be the easiest way for a quote unquote.
Any regime that's willing to communicate with the Russians will not be accepted by the Ukrainians at this point. That's just a fact. That's just a fact. It'll never be legitimate. It'll always have it hanging over its head that it's a Russian puppet, blah blah blah, like a sort of Damocles. It's never going to work. The problem with what you suggested with the Western supplies is, and I've been hearing this from all sorts of people. It's like, look, they have to mobilize the youngest cohort. If they're not willing to go all in, then it is ridiculous to expect its Western partners to go all in on their behalf, because it is going to cost tens, if not hundreds of billions to retool Western economies into a war footing for a war, to support a war they're not even directly involved in. If you're converting to a war economy while you're not at war, you've already lost.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying was I don't really think any of what I'm saying is actually going to come to fruition at all. It's just what Ukraine could potentially do hypothetically to achieve some sort of victory.
I mean, there are a couple things that the U.S. can do, but it would not be in strategic interest to do so. I mean, for example, like you look at how, like in the recent German Air Force leaks, they basically said the whole continent's basically out of cruise missiles. There's a very large cruise missile supply in the U.S. I mean, but the U.S. doesn't want to give it out, right? And the other limiting factor is the fact that Ukraine just does not have enough airplanes to actually launch all those cruise missiles. So, like, basically, you're looking at JASMs. Like, the U.S. has between 6,000 and 7,000. That's something that if they wanted to just, like, theoretically, let's say if Ukraine was gifted 100 new jets, and they just took the air JASMs and just launched several hundred of those just in waves at Crimea, yeah, that could do something. But the problem is, like, Ukraine, the U.S. doesn't want to give JASMs, and Ukraine is also facing a severe pilot shortage, as Scott mentioned. Like, they have only like a dozen pilots in training at any given time. So they also don't have the number of airframes. I mean, the F-16s they're giving them are literally the oldest F-16s still flying. They were the ones that delivered in the late 70s and early to mid 80s. So these are 40-year-old frames. right? These are just they might even have G restrictions based on how fucking old the airframes are. So,
well, I guess to sort of look at the question another way. I mean, what does winning look like to Ukraine? Does it mean that the Ukraine exists where the Ukrainian language is spoken and there's economic prosperity post-war and things don't suck? Then the best thing, then the way the Ukrainians win at this point is they surrender.
I mean, yeah,
that's how they win.
Ukrainian victory is literally surrendering right now, and
Well, that's the thing. That's not what they consider victory. So
I
their
know,
version of it.
I know.
So their
that's-
version
and I
of
think-
victory. That's what makes this question interesting, because how can we eke out a vanishingly small, a window of opportunity that is rapidly closing? Is that salvageable? I think that's a far more interesting question, because we all know that they could. If the objective is to have a Ukraine, then they could have that by surrendering, but that's not really an answer, right?
The objective is to stop Russia and bleed it out as much as possible. It seems to have always been the case, and that's why the West never went full in for their proxies. We can literally go and check history. I'd say maybe Vietnam, in a way, the way the South Vietnamese were supported, the West never went full in for its proxies to win. The only reason for all of those proxies is to, bleed out the other side. And I mean, Ukraine has been, I guess, successful with it, but it's also drowning the West with it. So,
I mean, I'm just pointing out, like, if the Ukrainians backed up a tank and put its tow rope around the Bandera statue in Lvov and yank that thing down its face tomorrow, guess what? The war could end tomorrow.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, that's all there is to it.
If we're taking this a more in a different direction, where, like, how can they make this as painful for Russia as possible? Blow the fucking pipelines. Start hitting. Concentrate entirely on picking off infrastructure in Russia. You're not going to win. You're not going to stop them, but you are going to hurt. But that is going to hurt.
Yeah.
Especially because they're still using Druzhba and the other pipelines to export gas into Europe. Europe's still buying it despite the sanctions and everything.
Yeah.
Blow those up, and then you kind of also force the Europeans to take a stand, because there's nothing to salvage after that. There's no potential for business as usual once this is over. It's you're either in or you're out.
Yeah.
Which begs the question of why haven't they blown the pipelines yet?
So basically, terrorism
also,
is the only option of. If I get it right, terrorism is the only option for Ukraine, just like how it was with Nord Stream.
Well, and if I could also point something out, and I point this out.
Like, if you want some context for this, I'm Syrian Armenian, so we kind of think in a what's the word I'm looking for? Psychotic kind of fashion when it comes to war.
Well, and also, I mean, if I could point this out, the Russians have refrained from, if the Ukrainians want to play the counter value game, it is well within the Russian capability to destroy every power plant and dam and infrastructure facility in Ukraine and literally send Ukraine back to the 18th century.
That is one thing that we're ignoring.
But if you're doing this, you've already lost. You're just making trying to make your opponent's victory as pyrrhic as possible. At that point, you don't care anymore.
Yeah, and that's not a victory.
Right. That's nationalist logic, though. I mean, they not necessarily win, but if they have a Masada, that means they win anyway, like, because it will inspire future generations. I mean, that's the thinking of the most insane nationalists, right? Which is why there's a lot of these propaganda. Which is why the GUR always does propaganda shit, right? And always does these like attacks at civilians and all these other things. Because the whole point of it is to create propaganda of the deed, right? So, like, even like if Ukraine loses, well, I mean, even if they know, I think some people in the government of Ukraine know that they're going to lose, but how do they draw this out as much as possible? How do they create the most impactful historical legacy?
I mean, we literally look back in history, and I mean, Bandera lost, but yet we see in 100 years there are monuments to him. So he was able to somehow crave his road. And that's the question to Russian authorities. What do we do to not make it happen again?
Well, I mean, you see in Germany there are no monuments to Hitler.
Crush them.
That's good.
If you want the answer, you know the answer to this question. It's crush them. It's not the good answer. It's not the nice answer. It's not the friendly answer. It's why have all the jihadis been exiled from the Republic of Chechnya? Why does no Chechen refer to their republic as Ishkeria anymore? That is the answer. We all know it, but it's not a
Chechen
friendly
Republic
thing to say.
is a very complicated topic. In Russia, up to date, the propaganda for the foreigner, the look for the foreigners is a lot deeper than how a lot of, big chunk of Russians see Chechnya nowadays, especially due to its involvement in special military operation and how they handled it. I mean, it's a completely different topic, but the thing is, the Russian authorities, for example, the Ukrainian language can still be studied on the liberated territories.
That's a problem.
And I
mean,
some
hell,
could
as
argue
far as
it's a
I
problem.
know, the Ukrainian language is an official language in Kherson and Zaporizhia right now. It's
But I mean,
official.
the Russian-controlled territories are a different matter, because unless the plan is to annex all of Ukraine, and let's be honest, it's nobody wants Western Ukraine. It's not worth it. Everyone hates you. It's not worth occupying. So you're still stuck with a part of Ukraine that is under its own control. How do you crush it there? That's a question.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, people keep on saying nobody wants Western Ukraine, but either there's going to be a rump Ukraine left, which is just packed full of Ukrainian ultranationalists, or the Russians are going to do something about it. So I'm not sure there's going to be a choice in the matter.
I don't think it's worth occupying. It's just you're looking at like guerrilla insurgency until the end of time. There is no reconciliation with Western Ukraine and Russia, because this whole one people business doesn't apply to Western Ukraine. They're historically under the Polish sphere of influence. They're not historically Russian. There's no brotherhood there. These Ukraine, and I've been saying this for more than a decade, Ukraine is two raccoons in a trench coat pretending to be a country. It always has been.
I mean, sure, but also I lost my train of thought.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say, I mean, sure, but there's two things going on here. One, the Russians could, work out a deal to partition Ukraine. There's been a lot of talk of that, and also with the Poles, who I think would be willing to take on that project, and also, I mean, the other question is, well, guerrilla insurgency with whom? There's guerrilla insurgency
With the Polish,
with large numbers of.
Have you seen the Medvedev's map?
But not even the Poles, because think about it, these are the people that did Galicia and East Poland. Like, the Poles do not like these people either.
Well, yes, but I mean, a lot of this, much of Western Ukraine was historically Poland at one point. I mean, this was a century ago, but it was part of Congress Poland. And also, I mean, insurgencies are fueled by countries with large numbers of young men, with healthy demographics, with lots of young, stupid men who want to go kill the occupiers. That simply isn't the case in Ukraine right now.
Also, you have to assume that if the left bank of the Dnieper falls, and then like the West is being threatened, like a whole lot of the young men will pack up and leave before they can get press ganged. I mean, that's going to be another thing.
I mean, like I've made this joke before, but somebody was talking about how I think somebody made a joke on Twitter about imagine the horrors the Russians would inflict on an occupied Ukraine. I was like, double pensions and pay them on time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, I actually was introduced to the whole draft dodging side of Twitter, which is actually kind of funny. I mean, where you have the Azovites and other nationals, like they just like in Twitter flame wars with the people who are dodging the draft. Like, there's a lot of coped-hard thinking on the for Western Ukrainians. I think there's one recent incident where some town like beat up some recruiters, and then the Azovites are saying like, well, you know, when the Russians come, they're going to kill all of you because your grandparents were then in the Ukrainian insurgent army, right? They'll settle the scores because you killed Russians before. And then some of the responses were like, "Oh, they're never going to come to the West. What are you talking about? If they come to the West, they'll upset Europe. So of course they're not going to come to the West, right? They have no interest in taking us over. So this is the kind of thinking that a lot of people actually have, even at this point. Like the war is something far away. And this is the other thing I'd say when you're talking about like Ukraine and what counts as a loss, like. To them, like losing the Donbass is not really a loss because psychologically, like that part of the country never really mattered to them, right?
I mean, it should have. It was their
Donbass mattered to the whole Ukraine. Well, I mean, economically wise.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I don't understand how do they want to get this territory back? I mean, because they always talk about 1991 borders when they themselves constantly barrage people that live there, calling them all kinds of degradative slurs imaginable. How do they expect to get this territory? Do they just want to like kill literally everyone there? They are delusional.
I mean, what were they doing from 2014 until 2022?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I don't think that. I mean, obviously, they're not the sharpest tools in the shed because if they were, they would think about the exact things that we're talking about right now. Why are you making enemies of the people that you're claiming are Ukrainian or whatever? Because they're not, right? To them, they're not Ukrainian. They're Russian peoples that are living in Ukraine. And that's exactly the reason why, in my personal opinion, I think Russia went in, right? Because there is some sort of even the Western Ukrainians admit that those people are not really Ukrainian in their own sense. So yeah, I don't know where their thinking is. I don't think that they're doing much thinking in general. I think that's kind of.
I mean, a great example is how they blocked Crimean water supply, and you expect this for people of those territories to like wait for you. Then you block them water. They're delusional. That's the best word to describe them. But you don't underestimate your enemy. They might be delusional, but they can cause a lot of trouble simply by terrorism, and they've been doing it. I mean, I myself, for example, I was at my mom actually was one of the witnesses of the Ukrainian terrorist attack here in St. Petersburg. It was Vladlen Tatarsky, a military correspondent that was killed. You guys probably know. I literally left.
Statue?
Yes. I went to that bar for pretty much every single lecture. They had like Z people, and I left around 20 to 30 minutes before the explosion. And like, I know, and I was, even though I live in St. Petersburg, I in a way was touched by all of this. And I mean, that's why you can see me having a Ukrainian coat hanging besides me. I have a Ukrainian armored vest. Like, yeah, terrorism is the only tool they seemingly got left if we exclude the delusions of taking territories back, because, well, I think we got to the conclusion that it's, I'd say, impossible.
Yeah, if only somebody would, on their side, would figure that out. Or maybe they do have it figured out and they just don't care.
I mean, Arestovich maybe kind of, if you know him.
I mean, Arestovich
He's not even in
whichever
Ukraine,
way the wind is blowing. But I mean, I think there were people in the German military who were saying, like, in 1942, who were saying, we need to make peace. We need to, this war is not, we're not going to win this war. And due to the political realities of the situation, that was impossible. They were into the death, and I mean, I think it could very well be the same situation here. Ukraine should have. I mean, the best time for Ukraine to make peace was in 2014, was in 2015. The second best time for Ukraine to make peace was in March 2022, and the third best time for Ukraine to make peace is now.
Which is true. Last topic of conversation that I wanted to talk about today for this roundtable. With the current position Ukraine is in, with the current standing, let's negate Macron sending in NATO troops. With what is happening in Ukraine right now in 2024, how do you guys see the rest of this year playing out for the Ukrainians? How do you see it playing out for the Russians? Obviously, predictions are futile and it doesn't matter. I'm not asking you for some hyper accurate thing that you're going to be held to in the future. But if nothing changes from the status quo right now, that the Ukraine does not receive more funding, they don't go through a mobilization because it's kind of 50-50 right now if they're going to actually mobilize again, that younger that is still around to mobilize. And, they go all in. Besides that, how do we see the next 9 months in Ukraine playing out?
I guess I'll go first. I've opined on this before. I believe the Russians are in a position to do a strategic offensive this year. I earlier suggested they can do it over the winter, but really probably a better time for it is this summer. I think they've been shaping the battlefield very diligently, and conditions are set for the Russians to roll. Now, what that offensive is going to look like, I'm not sure. I could speculate, but I could speculate. I'm not sure how useful it would be. I suggested last week the Russians could make some very significant gains and really destabilize the Ukrainian position in Ukraine by doing basically the Ukrainian Zaporizhzhia offensive of 2023 in reverse and just steaming up through the Dnieper Bend. I think that would really really do some damage to the Ukrainian position. But we'll see. I mean, this could be very large. It could end up being fairly small, but I think they're primed to go this summer.
I feel like regarding this question, I'd love to hear someone pro-Ukrainian say their stance. I'll just ask Scott, have you considered inviting anyone like pro-Ukrainian here?
Oh yeah, no. I selected. I mean, Grisha, obviously you are pro-Russian, obviously. Whatever people want to think about me, I don't have a horse in the race. So I have my own opinion and biases based off of what I'm seeing, and that has influenced my I guess my bias towards this conflict a little bit. But I would still consider myself at least neutral. Like, I'll say bad things about the Russian military. I'll say bad things about the Russian government if it's deserved. With Ukraine, I do not care. And people are going to roll their eyes at me and whatever. And people have their own bias. But I selected most of you because, for the most part, you guys are, especially Speckle, Armchair, and Clown, are rather, while you have your own biases, you actually analyze in neutral terms. I am more than welcome, and this goes for everybody watching, everybody listening. If you want to put out feelers to pro-Ukrainian voices, commentators, please do so. Get them on my show. I would love to have a one-on-one debate. They are more than welcome to join these roundtables in the future. Please come on. I am not shutting down discourse. I want everybody who has a legitimate I guess following, I would say, somebody who has some credibility in the space to come on and talk at any time. I am more than willing. Yes.
I'm sure the Colonel would be willing.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. And guys, if you want to get them on the show, go ahead. I do not mind. Just tell them to DM me. I don't necessarily know who's willing to come on. I don't talk to a lot of them. In fact, I'm blocked by a vast majority of pro-Ukrainian accounts.
That tells a lot about them.
Yeah, I will not hold that against anybody. They're more than welcome to come on and voice their opinion on my show, and I welcome it. I think that it's important to have voices on from every different side, because at the end of the day, for the people watching this it's for them, right? We're having this conversation not for us. We do this all day, every day. We don't care. We all know this information, and we all know our opinions on it and everything. We're doing this to present this to you guys in a way that helps you understand the conflict from multiple different angles. If that means that you want to hear pro-Ukrainian voices, get them to reach out to me. Please do it. I fully appreciate that.
Well, I've been on for an hour and a half.
I actually think I'm going to wrap this up. This was a great roundtable. We've reached an hour and a half. We've talked about all of the topics we need to talk about. Thank you so much, Doctor.
I think I just want to comment.
Go ahead.
Last
words. Go ahead.
It's like I don't have any concrete predictions on the military side, but one thing to watch out for is the signs of like Ukrainian the Ukrainian state fraying or collapsing. I don't say total collapse, but you'll begin to see more social unrest as perhaps more these attempts to get bodies for the war effort become more and more like intense, right? And this is compounded by the fact that certain parts of the aid are actually held up in U.S. Congress. I think they'll pass something at some point, but the main issue is like they're not going to get everything that they want. I think that's pretty much clear. I mean, the idea that Ukraine's going to be pivoted away from or will be cut off, that's not going to happen because I think Ukraine's still obligated something like another $12 billion in contracts this year, another $10 billion next year. But this is obviously not enough. And what's even perhaps more important, is also financial assistance to keep the Ukrainian government running, right? That 20 or so billion that pays pensions and salaries and all that stuff. This is obvious, and this is compounded by what you're also seeing with protests, like basically with the border blockages in Poland, right? They're impeding Ukrainian trade, making their trade the trade deficit even worse. They have a balance of payments issue right now. So carrying forward this year, like you begin to see how perhaps these pressures might begin to undo the Ukrainian state. I mean, I won't say that you'll see a collapse necessarily, but you'll see before this idea that Ukraine had almost no social unrest because of the various factors I explained already. I don't think this balancing actually be continued forever, right? So,
Grisha, did you have something you wanted to say on this topic? I my thing cut out and I had to come back in, so I forgot where we were.
Honestly, I'm not a military expert. I'm only a gaming expert. The only thing I can really bring to the discussion is I am 24/7 in touch with multiple soldiers of different armed forces branches. And if I ever get an insight out of them, I'll tell you, though, watch out for Slavyansk Kramatorsk.
Yep.
That's all I can specifically target on.
You hear that, guys? Watch out for that.
You want my prediction on this?
Yes, sir.
They're going to get the Tauruses. They're going to pop the Kerch Bridge. And then they're going to invade Crimea. And there's going to be a big beach party with a bunch of cartoon dogs.
Classic.
And then everyone in Russia is going to cry. And it'll be, it'll just be Eastern Ukraine.
We're going to cope and see it harder than we have ever coped and seen it.
So true.
Now, do we think that the Kerch Bridge is going to get hit again before the end of this conflict?
Oh, of course.
I would put
at least another 3 times.
At least solid attempts, like multiple missiles in a barrage going for the bridge, or some drones or whatever. I do believe we're going to see it again. They are obsessed with it, man. They can't comprehend a land bridge. They can't. That's not even in their vocabulary. It's all about that bridge. So I do think that that's going to happen. All right. Are we good? Everybody good? Got your final words in? All right. Thank you so much, Snekotron. Thank you so much, Grisha. Thank you so much, Vaughn. And thank you so much, Armchair Warlord, for coming on. Obviously, you guys have an open invite to any future roundtables we have, or I have, I should say. I'm going to try to do them most weekends. Not next weekend because I have something coming up, but the weekend after that, there will be the second official roundtable. So mark it on your calendars, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for who donated, questions, super thanks, super chats. I appreciate you guys more than anything. Thank you for everybody who came in here and watched. We had 8,000 people watch live today. That is awesome. That is the most I've ever had, and I really do appreciate it. Again, thank you so much for our panel for coming on and talking. Please go and follow them. I put their links in there in the chat, but you guys can just look at their names and go search them on Twitter and find them just as easily. So go do that. They are good sources of information on this conflict. And again, remember, if you guys know any prominent pro-Ukrainian voices who would like to come on, the invitation is always open. It is not hostile. I am not a mean person. I promise I will have a genuine discussion, except maybe with David because personal things there. Other than that, anybody, bring them on. Let's go. Thank you, everybody, again, and have a great day. Bye.
Later.